Welcome, everybody. My name is Rhonda Dearborn. I'm the Senior Acquisitions Editor here at Springer Publishing Company for our counseling publishing program. And I'm so excited today to welcome you to the presentation, Interdisciplinary and Intersectionality in Disability and Human Services in a Time of Challenge. Very timely. I wanted to let you know that this event is being recorded. We will be disseminating out the recording of this event in about 7 business days, along with the presentation deck that the presenters are providing today. It will be in a PDF, so you can share that email with the recording and the deck with your colleagues. And that, again, will be in about 7 to 10 business days. You are all muted, and we cannot hear you. We cannot see you. That will be the case throughout the presentation. But you can post questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions, we will be doing Q&A at the conclusion of this event. So please put your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat box, but the Q&A box, and we will be taking questions at the end of this event. So without further ado, I'm going to do the introductions for our speakers. We've got Dr. Debra Harley. She's Provost Distinguished Service Professor in the Department of Early Childhood Special Education and Counselor Education at the University of Kentucky. She is co-coordinator of the doctoral program in counselor education. Dr. Harley's research interests include disability issues, cultural diversity, substance use disorders, gender issues, LGBTQ issues, and ethics. We also have Dr. Chris Flaherty, who is an associate professor in the University of Kentucky College of Social Work. He is director of the college's Military Behavioral Health Research Laboratory, as well as the Graduate Certification in Military Behavioral Health. He serves as a primary investigator for the U.S. Army/UK Master of Social Work Education Collaborative. Dr. Flaherty's research focuses in the area of behavioral health interventions for the military and veteran populations. He currently serves as co-investigator for the Department of Defense sponsored research to improve suicide prevention services within military settings. Finally, we have Anthony Dotson, retired Lieutenant Colonel. He is the director of the Veterans Resource Center at the University of Kentucky. He is a guest lecturer and field practicum site supervisor for the College of Social Work, as well as a guest lecturer in the Department of Psychology. He co-instructs a course on working with military families within the Department of Family Sciences. He currently is working on a terminal degree in leadership in higher education, and his research interests include student veteran persistence, retention, and graduation in higher education. He is also director of the Veterans Resource Center at the University of Kentucky. And with that, I'm going to turn it on over to you, Debra, to take over. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Again, thank all of you for joining us. Today, we're going to talk with you a little bit about disability studies in human services from an interdisciplinary and intersectional perspective, give you some information about the textbook, and from that, we're going to present a case study, and that case study then will lead into what are some of the applications that center on that study. We will have a Q&A section, and then at the end, we will also entertain some questions throughout this presentation, and we will conclude and then wrap up with our Q&A. First, we would like to get a feel of who is in our audience. So if you could tell us what your current role is that you're in working with clients who are affected by disabilities. Are you a rehab counselor, a social worker, working some other behavioral health profession, the medical or nursing services? Are you a student, or are you a member of another group or occupation? Let us know. Okay, while we're getting that answered, just to give you a little bit of background about the origin of this book and how it came about. Each one of us work and teach as educators in a human service area. And we also do that from an interdisciplinary perspective. We are in disciplines of social work, of counseling, of rehabilitation, And each one of these disciplines are interdisciplinary by nature. Okay, we have some results here. I am glad to see we have about 20% of our participants are rehab counselors. About 17% are social workers. Another 8% identify as being within the behavioral health profession. We have 1% from the medical or nursing profession. And we have 16% students. And our largest group identify as working or being in some other type of area working with people with disabilities, 37%. It is good to see this type of diversity participating. And again, thank you for doing that. So as I was saying, we work in human services and train people in human services from an interdisciplinary perspective. And we know one thing that is important is that the individuals that we are working with and that we are training, they're very diverse. They're diverse not only in terms of the traditional or the demographic characteristics, we expect them to be diverse in such as race, ethnicity, gender, and age, but they're also diverse in the types of disabilities they may have. They're also diverse in the severity of those disabilities, and they're diverse in the settings in which they experience those types of disabilities. And what we do know of human service practitioners and human service educators, they are now working in situations that require them to have a broad understanding and of disabilities and how those disabilities are interrelated and interconnected by other attributes. So when we talk about doing our training and our teaching, it is crucial that human service educators and human service providers understand service delivery from an intersectional perspective. And when we get this out very early in the training and the teaching process, it helps the students to really understand that approaching consumers, approaching clients or patients from a broad, holistic, and comprehensive approach is crucial. So in other words, what I'm saying is that teaching and training our students to recognize very early in their process the importance of intersectionality and the role of interdisciplinarity in what they do. So if we look at some basic questions that are related to intersectionality and interdisciplinary, one thing we love to ask is how has interdisciplinary evolved to optimize practices in the area of disability studies? Well, one thing we do know is that it brings together experts and specialists to advocate on behalf of, as well as work with persons with disabilities to plan what's the best or at least the most effective approach to interventions or service delivery. So the interaction of the interdisciplinary approach allows for, as well as promote, the exploration of what's the best way, what's the most effective way to deliver services to persons with disabilities and to learn about working with individuals with disabilities. We also ask, what does intersectionality mean within the context of disability? One thing we do know is that every individual has more than one identity, and disability is one aspect of that identity. And disability intersects with all of those other identities in different ways to produce either a positive or a negative outcome for that individual. If we consider, for example, you have an older person, and I'm saying older as in elderly, female with a disability who lives in poverty and who resides in a rural area. If you think about the intersectional components of age, of gender, of disability, of poverty, and of geographic location, all of those things come together and will influence the outcome for that individual. So how can interdisciplinary collaboration work to serve various groups of individuals and families who experience disability? Probably one of the better ways to do this is through the team approach. And the team approach, meaning consisting of individuals from various disciplines, in order to better address the multiple and complex issues of a client, and the family, and to understand how those dynamics of individual and dynamics of family have influences on each other and how they produce certain outcomes. So when we think about the evolution of disciplinary practice, who makes up these teams and what are their roles? And this is something that we have to consider depending on the setting we're in and the populations we're working with. And what are the key considerations toward delivering ethical and culturally competent services? This is at the very core of what we do in human services. Whatever we do must be done in an ethical manner, and it must be culturally appropriate for the populations we're working with. So these are two key questions of understanding what makes up the team of interdisciplinary participants and making sure that the ethical and cultural competency exists in order to work with, provide services to individuals, as well as when we're teaching and training those individuals who will become practitioners in human services. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Chris, and Chris is going to give it an example of persistent and emerging population trends when we're talking about individuals with disabilities in human services. Chris?
Yes, thanks, Deborah. And I would like to thank Dr. Harley as well as Tony Dotson, Colonel Dotson, for collaborating for inviting me in to work in this project. It's been a wonderful experience, and it's been really a great learning experience to see how that various professions and professionals can work together, because not one profession can solve all the issues experienced by folks who are affected by disability and the outcomes of disability. And also, I really loved Deborah's idea for the book of looking at intersectionality, because we do know that one person experiencing disability is their experience is not going to be like someone else's, because we look at, in my field, in social work, we talk a lot about person's social position, where they are in society, what forces are impacting them, what resources do they have access to or have trouble accessing. And so throughout this textbook, we really explore how experiences may vary, not only according to various disabilities that a person may experience, but also where they are in society and what resources can they easily access and not so easily access. And who is their social network, and how are those folks involved in dealing with disability within the family. And so I think Dr. Harley did a great job talking about intersectionality and the impact of these intersections of, say, what is it like living in poverty with a certain disability versus having resources at your disposal? What is it like being an offender or an offender population, maybe incarcerated or under social restriction, and also experiencing disability, and immigrants and refugees coming to the nation, trying to assimilate, acculturate, and also deal with disabilities. Challenges are very different from one group to another, and there are also times when there are multiple the intersectionalities, and a person is dealing with various things and forces and challenges while also dealing with disabilities. So that is infused throughout this book. And I want to say too up front that you'll see that we're going to talk quite a bit about veteran populations here, military populations. We just selected that as an exemplar from our text. This textbook is not heavily focused exclusively on veteran military populations. We just decided to highlight that because it's a very timely topic, and our veterans experience a particular type of intersectionality. Okay, so for example, one example we talk about in our book is the coexisting addictive behaviors and disabilities. That's an intersectionality that's very prevalent in current culture, where we know that those with disabilities are at increased risk of substance misuse, and substance misuse adds particular risk to managing and dealing with disabilities and functioning. So we will talk about in that context, looking through a biopsychosocial lens, how do we assess the needs of this person, this client system, and how can we actualize several disciplines together to work at dealing with the various challenges that these individuals may be experiencing. A big topic these days, of course, is poverty, and poverty has a big role in the experience of disability and the ability for individuals and families to manage disability and to optimize their outcomes. And we know that poverty is a risk factor for many outcomes, but we know that it really entails a lot of challenges for individuals with disability, because poverty affects ability to access services, ability for family members to provide care and support for their members experiencing disability. And this can be particularly relevant in a place where we're coming from in Kentucky, in rural populations who are also experiencing poverty and disability. Access to services can be very limited. Having access to multidisciplinary teams can be a challenge, and accessing services is particularly a challenge for this population. So when we look at poverty and disability, we have to think about how can we reach out to folks living in rural areas who are in poverty. How can we get them the services they need? And those services may be complex and require a lot of services from various disciplines. So thinking about what we've talked about so far, how do you see the concept of social justice as being relevant to providing disability services? What intersectional aspects should we consider beyond, say, poverty and disability and veteran status and disability? What are other areas that we can consider that could provide either increased or decreased access and ability to benefit from services? So with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Tony. He's a fellow veteran who has worked extensively with military and veteran populations. But before we do that, we'd like to check in and see how many folks in the audience here have served in the military. So if you would respond for a little poll here about if you served in the Army, Marines, Navy, Air Force, go Air Force, or Coast Guard, please respond. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. I really do like to know if there's veterans in the audience when I speak, and I often have them stand up or raise their hand and be recognized. So looks like we have an overwhelming Army domination there, Chris, as usual. So,
there's a lot of you folks.
It is representative of the force. The Army is by far the largest, and we tend to have the most veterans in any given crowd. So again, thank you for your service. I will echo Debra's and Chris's thank yous for being here, for taking the time out of your busy days to set aside to listen to this. We've come to the point, basically, where your question gets answered. Why's the fat old Army guy here? Well, I became a veteran in 2008 when I retired, and I started serving veterans in 2009. And it's been an eye-opening experience, to say the least. I find it equally rewarding and frustrating, but I am humbled and honored to be here with you today to talk about this exciting project. This slide just has a few numbers on it worth noting. Roughly 7% of our US population are veterans, and that varies by state, of course. The number not on this slide is the number 20, which represents our suicides per day. I believe that number to be higher, frankly, simply based on things like accidental overdoses and single vehicular accidents and death by cop and inconsistencies in our reporting. But those are just some numbers to be noted. Next slide, Debra. Depending on what era veteran you are, you may or not appreciate being thanked when I thanked you for your service. Many of our young veterans don't consider what they did service, interestingly enough. And if you can understand this, it goes a long way in helping to explain many of our challenges today when it comes to assisting our veterans. just ask them, they don't need your help. So they're a tough, tough crowd, a lot of pride and so forth. But after Vietnam, we like to say that we have had an all-volunteer military. And I actually used air quotes there without a camera, so you didn't see them. But trust me, the wording was and is intentional, because when we think volunteer, we may imagine long lines outside the recruiting stations. We tend to idealize. We think in terms of patriotism and selflessness and the greater good. And in reality, however, we are more of an incentivized military. And we've had to do some heavy recruiting over the years to maintain our all-volunteer force. And money for college has consistently been the #1 incentive, followed by just money. Signing bonuses, for example. Learning a trade and gaining work experiences is right up there, as far as adventure and travel and some other stuff. In the early 80s, when I joined, the commercials were be all you can be. And if you're old enough to remember that, you know what I'm talking about. The Army ran that for about 20 years. It was also a great place to start. So I was looking for a way to pay for college. I was looking for a trade. I was going to be an illustrator and become part of the Marvel dynasty. That obviously didn't work out. And so here I am hawking textbooks instead of comic books, but hey, not too bad. The problem with an incentivized force, however, is that they don't stick around. So when they obtain the incentive, they tend to leave the organization. So about 250,000 leave the military every year. So this is why our newer veterans don't register with the VA. They don't gravitate to veteran service organizations or, frankly, identify as a veteran. And any office, including the VA, that serves our veterans will tell you basically that the hardest part of getting veterans to take advantage of the services. It's not like we have a shortage of resources, but it's just getting those veterans connected to those resources. My center probably sees only about 20% of our entire veteran population. But the funny thing is, regardless of how much they may or may not identify as a veteran, that doesn't change the fact that they are a veteran, and thus may have some challenges as a result, not just from their experience, which could include PTSD or TBI or MST, but also on how they are perceived by others. Frankly, I think veterans are the poster children for intersectionality. So you think of all the potential identities a veteran may have, whether it's gender, race, sexual orientation, socioeconomic, disability, religion, and oh, by the way, they're a veteran. In one environment, that veteran status may give them advantage or power, and in another, that same identity gives them bias or discrimination. The three main influences that I've seen on transition really are pretty common sense if you think about it, but the first is their experience. Obviously, the further removed their experience was from civilian life, the tougher that transition will likely be, or the duration of that experience. The longer they were immersed in the military culture, the tougher the transition can be. And there's not much we can do about that except have a better understanding of military culture. The next is expectations. And I think most of you would agree that nearly all of us and all of our stress and our frustrations tend to stem from our expectations not being met, whether that was at the drive-through or at the dinner table. Any veterans have had expectations elevated by the military, frankly, to the extent that could be more harmful than good. They exit thinking they'll be scooped up by a sea of waiting employers looking for that military training. And the reality is just not that sunny. I spent a lot of time managing expectations, but for most veterans, the real world can be a rude awakening. And finally, the environment has a great deal to do with how veterans transition. And that's where I probably spend most of my effort. I've been teaching military cultural awareness on campus and around the state to providers, to employers, to educators, to frankly anyone who will listen. Because the more inclusive and informed the environment is, the better the outcomes for everyone. and the easier it is to integrate care. And with that, I'll hand it back over to my Air Force brother, Chris.
Thanks, Tony. So now we just want to show you, we're going to show a few features from the textbook, the sorts of things that we ask students to contemplate and reflect upon. And throughout the book, we have several case studies. And this is just an example. This one's actually not in the book. We just put this together for the webinar. But this is an example of the kind of things we ask students to use to apply the concepts that we present in each chapter. So this one is relevant, of course, to a veteran. So I'll quickly read through it. John is our veteran. He's a 24-year-old Army veteran who's recently been medically discharged due to suffering a traumatic brain injury, or TBI, during a second tour of combat in Iraq. He's also been diagnosed with PTSD, which is often co-occurring with TBI. John lives in rural Kentucky community with his wife, Amy, and 3-year-old daughter, Landry. John lost his job at a local auto repair shop due to missing work and being inattentive around dangerous equipment. He's currently drawing unemployment insurance, and Amy works part-time at a local grocery. The family is struggling financially, and Amy has threatened to file for divorce due to John's inability to contribute to the family and his frequent temper outbursts. Landry is behind in her peers in language acquisition and is being evaluated for developmental delay. So this is really not an atypical case at all. This is a very common type of case that we would assess and try to draw up a viable intervention plan for a veteran family. And so the sorts of things that we would ask our students to reflect upon and think about are things like, what additional information is needed in order to develop a comprehensive intervention plan for the family. And talking about comprehensive is to address the multiple challenges and the multiple issues that are present in the family, not just John's TBI or PTSD, but what is going on holistically within the family and what services could be brought to bear to optimize their circumstances. And then think about, how does the concept of intersectionality apply to this case? So what various things are interacting here? Well, we have obviously veteran status, John's experience as a veteran, which has potentially many implications, including a potential that he is reluctant to accept or receive care or certain types of care, because we know that especially mental health care is very stigmatized within this population. So how do we address that with the family? How do we address issues of income and sustainment financially for the family? Since John is limited in his capacity to work, Amy is trying to work part-time. They're parenting a young child who is herself suffering maybe from some challenges or disability. How do all these things come together, and how do we assess and tease out these various challenges, and which resources and professions can we bring to bear to try to help the family? And which service systems and professionals might serve the family, and what kind of roles would each of these services play? Is there a place for mental health intervention, for early childhood intervention, for medical intervention? How would these services be coordinated and used in the optimal way to serve the family?
Thanks a lot, Chris. Next, we're going to provide you with some samples of the instructional resources that are included in the book, and also to let you know that there's also an instructor manual that comes with that book. And how can you really use this book? It's not just, I think, only for instruction, even though that's the primary focus of it. It could also be used for in-service training with staff, getting them to understand these different populations and the challenges and how to approach these challenges from an interdisciplinary and an intersectional approach. It could also be used for those who are practicing in the field of human services as a resource. because we're constantly learning and upgrading and updating what we know, this is a good source that you can have on that shelf when you may need to pull it off to look at something related to a particular population with a disability, to look at something related to a particular setting, or to even look at who else you would need to have as a part of that team or that service approach to assist you. We have field-based experiences as a part of the book, and the premise behind the field-based experiences is to think about, after you've read the content, now maybe I could go and talk to a veteran about his or her experiences in the military, and that will give me a real experience, a real core to identify with what is going on with that individual transitioning to civilian life. Military cultural competence is maybe another exercise that an individual can participate in. And this is so crucial when we're talking about the veteran population, because we're talking about military culture versus civilian culture. So being able to distinguish those things and to understand the difference between the two, and how the veteran really has to exist with both of those cultures. So we have experiential or field-based exercises throughout the book for each one of the chapters that you can participate in, you can use as assignments for students. The book also contains self-check questions that are part of the manual. And this is a way to kind of check as you go, to see if you're comprehending or understanding what it is you're reading, what it is you're experiencing. So this is to kind of help individuals or help students key in on what are the major concepts as they're going over this material and as they're reading these chapters. So this again is some examples. It's tied to the military chapter and to the military presentation on some basic questions that you can ask after reading that chapter or as you're going through that chapter. There's a test bank that's a part of the instructor's manual, and we know how faculty really hate coming up with these questions. So we've created a test bank for you to use. Here we give you some examples of some of the questions that are part of that. And again, this one is tied to the veteran chapter, but each chapter comes with a test bank and comes with the key. So as a part of what you're doing as instruction or as training, you have a way to kind of test and check to see how well you're learning, how well you're comprehending. Some additional resources that you will find throughout the book. There are research highlights, and these are research boxes. They're talking about a particular study, a particular research, because we know that in human services, a lot rests on evidence-based services. What are the best practices? And we know that our practices should be informed by research. So each chapter contains some research highlights that can be incorporated, that the individual can go and look at and get some more information. There are discussion boxes with each chapter that zero in on the key concepts, and it also allows the reader or the student to be able to reflect upon how these things will be applied. What are the implications for practice? Electronic resources are also included, and these are listings of current websites with additional information, accessible resources. So things we could not get in the book, you have this additional resource of links that you can go to and get additional information and incorporate that as part of your teaching, your training, or your review. And I'm going to pass the ball back to you, Chris, to kind of summarize what are some of the key points.
Thanks, Deborah. Again, what we've covered in a very quick hit here are some key elements to applying an interdisciplinary and intersectionality approach to helping folks who are dealing with disabilities. And it's really important to consider a holistic intervention strategy. That's really what we're talking about when we talk about interdisciplinary services. What roles are best served by various persons across a team of professionals? How can they work best together to serve the various needs of these families and individuals? Because it's never a simple one intervention issue. There are inevitably multiple issues to be dealt with folks experiencing disability. Particularly, we have to consider their place in society, their resources, their challenges, and what may be missing that we may need to find a way to provide. We need to think about special populations, specifically in regard to providing services to individuals and families experiencing disability, because we cannot apply a one-size-fits-all. We have a challenge. It's very different to be experiencing a disability in poverty in a rural setting than it is to be experiencing a similar disability in, say, a middle-class setting with many resources at your disposal. And what we need to do as providers of services for these folks is to think about what is this person's position in society? What are their challenges? What are their needs outside of the needs of just the disability itself? And we really need to we need to always consider culture when we apply and recommend services to individuals. Consider what cultural factors may be at play as far as what would be appropriate or accepted. We need to listen to our clients and let them tell us what they find acceptable and not acceptable in the receipt of services. And again, we should always be leaning toward applying our evidence-based interventions that have substantial research for efficacy behind them, so that we are providing the best services that our clients can receive. So thank you so much. Thanks to my co-presenters and for all of those who are participating. I know we have a lot of questions coming in, and I think we'll move to that piece of the discussion next.
We're going to allow Rhonda to kind of introduce what is available through some of the resources, rehab resources through Springer.
Thanks so much, Deborah. So yes, just for your edification, we do have resources through our journals. We do publish these journals that you see here. These are the links to those journals. So if you're interested, by all means, take advantage of that. We've had a question come up several times about this presentation. Some of you might have joined late. This presentation is being recorded. It will be disseminated. The recording, along with the presentation deck that you see here, will be disseminated via email as a PDF. So the link to these journals will be in that presentation, and everything that you've seen here will be afforded to you via email in about 7 business days.
Thank you, Rhonda. We would also like to kind of let Rhonda introduce to you if you're interested in purchasing or adopting this book, some additional information.
That's right. So this is our book here that Deborah and Chris were the editors of. We had lots of contributors, Tony being one of them, and this is our new book. It published very recently, just a few weeks ago, and we're very, very excited and proud to be offering this to you today through a discount code. And you see that discount code here, Harley Flaherty 25. You can go to springerpub.com and purchase it today. If you're interested in adopting this for a class, you can find your sales rep at the link that we also provide here. If you already know who your sales rep is, you're one step closer. But if you're interested, this is certainly a textbook, but it is also a book that can be used for continuing education, for your own edification if you're a professional. Clearly, the times are moving and changing. There's so much going on with this profession, and the interdisciplinary approach and intersectionality approach is a new take on the approach that this book takes in every chapter. So this is something that we're really proud to be promoting here today. We're going to be taking some questions. I think, Deborah, that is our next phase. If you can, Deborah, go to the next slide after this one. Before we take questions, I want to just say this now. If some of you are associated with continuing education or with a VA or with an association or society, and you're interested in buying this title in bulk, you can reach out to our new business development manager, Lee Montville. That is his email address, and we can negotiate terms for bulk sales. So I just wanted to emphasize that anyone who's interested in not just ordering a copy for themselves, but maybe ordering for a whole team, interdisciplinary group who deals with this population, you can talk to Lee about that. And then we're going to start taking some questions, but Debra, if you can move back 2 slides just so that we can have the code and the link available to folks while we're doing the QA.
All right, this is Lee Montville from Springer Publishing sales team, and thank you, Debra, Chris, and Tony. We got a bunch of questions, so I'm going to read them, and if you can please answer them, that would be amazing. Sharina asked, why do women fall under offender population?
And they're not put there as a negative. One thing that we have noticed, there's a dramatic increase in the number of women who are now classified as offender population. And a big part of that increase is associated with what is going on with the purchase as well as the sale of illegal substances. Women are also in relationship with individuals who are involved in the drug culture, and as a result, they kind of get tied up in that situation and end up with more arrests. So what we're seeing is a dramatic increase in women as a part of that population. Not to equate women with being offenders, but the numbers are going up drastically.
Thank you, Debra. And can I jump in right quick to follow up? I had the opportunity to work with one of our students a few years ago. She was the primary author on a paper called Throwaway Moms. And the article is about incarcerated mothers. And along with what Debra was talking about with the increase of incarceration of women, which is a very big issue in the state of Kentucky where we're residing, that incurs a whole number of challenges for families because many of these incarcerated women are mothers, and many of these incarcerated women are dealing with children with certain educational or intellectual disabilities or physical disabilities and are unable to provide a key element of support due to their incarceration. So it becomes a very complex and cascading kind of problem when mothers are incarcerated, mothers of young children, which really entails involvement of foster care, and then foster care for children with special needs becomes a particular challenge, finding the right environment and the right services for these children.
Thanks. The next question is from Cheryl. She said, Chris, I don't understand the quote, persistent and emerging population trends, end quote. The dynamics, disparities, and intersectionality examples presented here have been around for decades. How are persistent and emerging applied?
Persistent, okay, persistent and emerging. I think that is a good observation that these intersectionalities have been around for a while. I guess that we framed it in that way and to just annotate that they're very prevalent right now and have come to the fore as far as public awareness, that intersectionality of these factors work together, that these aren't, that folks who are experiencing disability or folks who are experiencing poverty, those things aren't independent, that they're very interactive. They have a lot of influence on what the kinds of resources and supports that families are able to access. So I think that the emergence is not so much that these are new issues, but that they are at the forefront of discussion in the social sciences about how we need to look at these issues from a holistic perspective and not as just individual issues to be addressed. I hope that helps.
Yes, that's great. Thank you. Carol asked, does the University of Kentucky offer an online workshop training on military cultural competence for current students?
We do not have an online version yet, but thanks to COVID, I am working towards that goal. We've done most of our training in-house has been in person.
Great, thank you. Lawanda asked, my understanding is that there has been an effort to move away from the use of PTSD to PTS, leaving out the word disorder because of the stigma. Do you address this in the book?
I don't know.
No, I think that within the book, Chris, I think it's still PTSD referred to it in the book as opposed to PTS.
I think that's true, and I can understand that. I can understand that concept, and it makes sense that, again, because of the stigma related to calling something a disorder. However, that's still the terminology used by the American Psychiatric Association. So we do refer to that as such, but I hope that we present it in a way that that does not present it as any kind of weakness or failure upon the person, because it's really an interesting discussion, because again, when we start calling something a disorder, it automatically becomes stigmatized. And this is and post-traumatic stress response is not necessarily aberrant. It's really expected. And actually, one of the more interesting areas of research going on is why do some folks not experience it? Because it really is a very normal reaction to an abnormal experience. So it's an interesting discussion, but we just stuck with what is currently the medical definition of the term.
And I think the other part of that as well is the unfortunate part is that something has to be considered a medical label in order for people to get services, to get intervention, and that's where that disorder component comes in. And I agree with you, Chris, it's not about stigmatizing the individual who is experiencing this.
That's a really good point. Thanks, Debra.
Thanks so much. I wanted to also just bring to your attention, Debra, Chris, and Tony, that we had some great comments in the chat. And what was interesting is several people commented about veterans and how they feel. So for example, one person mentioned, my husband doesn't join the VFW because he doesn't see his service, US Army MP, as comparable to our war veterans in past generations. He served from 1990 to 1999. And then another person, pointed out that their father served in the Vietnam era, but was not deployed to the war zone. So the father didn't consider himself a veteran either. Regardless, he is a veteran. So it was interesting to hear that. And I'd be curious, I think people would be curious to hear any thoughts or comments you might have about that.
I would like to say something, and then I would like to turn it over to Tony to speak. I can relate to those experiences. I served 20 years in the Air Force and never deployed, was queued up to deploy twice, but was dropped from the list twice when things got reshuffled. And although I didn't necessarily want to go serve in a war theater, it does change perspective sometimes for some folks, because my experience in the military is very different than someone who served 2-3 tours as an infantryman in Iraq or Afghanistan. And I don't think that, personally, I don't feel that makes me any less a veteran, but I have to realize that when we talk about things like military culture, the cultural experience that I had is different than those troops. There are actually multiple military cultures within the military. And there are times where, as a provider of mental health services, which I was for many years in the military, I may be challenged at times to have credibility with an operator who's seen significant contact and myself as a provider of mental health services who has not even been in theater. So I'd like to know what Tony's thoughts are on that.
Well, I think you're spot on, and I think those comments really reflect what we were bringing up about identity, and what level of veteran identity do you assume when you get out. For me, I'm the lowest priority for the VA. The VA has a priority system, and I'm the lowest possible priority you could have. So I've never go to the VA for their services because and I'm okay with that, because I believe that those who have been in combat, especially those injured by combat, should be the top priority. So the system kind of helps continue that thought process. The system overall, the DoD and the military culture, as Chris explained, the closer you are to the pointy end of the spear, so to speak, the tighter that bond is, and the more commonality you're going to see in identity for veteran status. So it varies greatly across the branches and across the service, but it's not surprising to have veterans out there of all eras that really don't view their time in as being equitable to someone who lost a limb or suffered due to combat. But it's consistent observation and a good observation.
Thanks so much. My colleague Rhonda will now join us again as we close out this webinar. Thanks again.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks for doing the questions. Thanks to all our presenters today, Tony, Chris, Debra. I really want to thank all of you who stayed on for now almost an hour for a presentation that I think was really insightful and informative. And thank you for your time, because we know that this can be such a busy time of year with those who are educators, everything starting up again soon, and everybody else for how hectic our lives are now. So thank you so much. And again, for those of you who joined late, this presentation is being recorded. It will be sent out to you along with the presentation deck as a PDF in about 7 business days. Thank you again for your time, and have a great rest of your day.